The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has declared that Iran has launched a total of around 4,300 weapons, including 700 missiles and 3,600 drones, targeting US and Israeli facilities since the outbreak of hostilities. Although Tehran has not released detailed figures on the exact scale of the damage, domestic Iranian media outlets have reported a staggering number. More than 54,000 civilian structures across Iran have been damaged in retaliatory airstrikes. Among them are hundreds of medical facilities, and many healthcare workers are reported to have been killed. On the other side, President Donald Trump reportedly reached out to one ally after another, urging them to join the campaign in the strategic strait, convinced that Iran would eventually back down. But what he received in return was hesitation, and in many cases, outright refusal to take part in what was seen as an extremely risky move. Meanwhile, the Israeli military, the IDF, has shown no sign of slowing down. In just one day, Israel claimed to have struck more than 200 new targets, focused mainly on central and western Iran, with the aim of dismantling command centers, air defense systems, and weapons production facilities. An IDF spokesperson also issued a grave warning, saying that Israel still has a list of thousands of additional targets inside Iran, and that new vulnerabilities are being identified every single day. Even residential areas housing members of the US diplomatic mission in Israel have reportedly been hit by falling debris from Iranian missiles, though fortunately no casualties were recorded. Yet military observers are now raising a troubling possibility. Could this all be part of a war of attrition? A number of analysts believe Iran's massive waves of attacks may have relied largely on older generation ballistic missiles. The logic behind such a strategy would be simple but effective. Stretch American and Israeli air defenses to the limit, forcing them to burn through interceptor missiles worth millions of dollars each against relatively cheap incoming threats. Reports from closed-door briefings in the US. Congress have also revealed a potentially crucial detail. Iran may still be hiding as much as 50% of its most advanced missile stockpile and launch systems deep underground, ready to deploy the moment cracks begin to appear in enemy defenses. At sea, tensions in the Strait of Hormuz are reaching a breaking point. Iran has openly challenged President Trump's claim that its navy has been neutralized. One Iranian general went even further, effectively daring the United States to send warships through the area if Washington truly believes victory is already in hand. At the moment, this vital shipping lane is said to be operating in near paralysis, with maritime traffic down by as much as 90%. At least 20 vessels have reportedly been attacked or interfered with, leaving roughly 20% of the world's crude oil supply disrupted or delayed, with potentially severe consequences for the global economy. Faced with that situation, President Trump is now urgently calling for an international coalition to reopen the strait, especially with support from minesweepers and naval assets capable of securing the waterway. He has reportedly contacted at least 7 countries, warning that Allied silence could ultimately threaten the future credibility of NATO itself. But the response has been strikingly cautious. Japan has said it has no immediate plans to deploy naval forces. Australia has flatly refused. South Korea has remained highly cautious, noting that any overseas military deployment would require parliamentary approval. Even European countries have shown little enthusiasm, and Germany in particular has expressed serious doubts about whether the current campaign is achieving enough to justify any expansion. So while the United States and Israel appear determined to push forward and bring the war to a decisive conclusion, their allies seem increasingly afraid of being dragged into a quagmire whose political and economic costs may be far too high. The lack of clarity in Washington's strategy has only made matters worse. When asked about his ultimate objective, President Trump reportedly said only that he had many goals in mind and wanted the conflict to end as soon as possible. It was a diplomatic answer, but not a clear one. And that ambiguity has produced a predictable result. No country appears willing to commit forces to the mission. America's allies want to know what the endgame is, and so far, they have not been given a convincing answer. At the same time, Iran continues to demonstrate that it can still launch daily attacks using missiles and drones. That alone suggests that despite the damage it has suffered, it has not been broken. Economic pressure is now building fast. Oil prices have surged past $100 a barrel. In the United States, gasoline prices have reportedly risen by around 65 cents a gallon since the fighting began. The International Energy Agency has even warned that this could become one of the most severe supply disruptions in modern history. Even some of Trump's closest advisors are said to be urging him to declare victory sooner rather than later, before the economic and political consequences spiral further out of control. But here lies the core problem. The United States and Iran are measuring victory by completely different standards. For Washington, victory means destroying Iran's military capacity and crippling its nuclear program. For Tehran, simply surviving the onslaught may already count as a major triumph. One expert put it bluntly, this was supposed to be a lightning war, but it has now become a longer, messier, and far more expensive conflict than originally expected. While Oman and Saudi Arabia are still trying to keep diplomatic channels alive, Iran has reportedly put forward demands that Washington is highly unlikely to accept. Compensation for wartime damage and guarantees that the United States will not strike again in the future. In other words, demands that amount to a near impossible starting point. A former British ambassador has argued that Iran may believe it now holds a strategic card. The ability to shake global oil prices using relatively simple military tools. And as signs emerge that the conflict could spread into Lebanon and Iraq, the chances for diplomacy appear more fragile than ever. Some European officials believe this latest escalation may represent Washington's final attempt to degrade Iran's remaining capabilities before stepping back. If so, then this war may not end with a peace agreement signed across a negotiation table. It may end only when the financial and political cost becomes too high for the United States to bear. President Donald Trump has said he is not yet ready to announce the end of the war, though he insists Iran has already suffered devastating losses. According to Trump, if American forces were to pull out now, Iran would need at least 10 years, possibly longer, to rebuild what has been destroyed. He has argued that recent strikes have all but wiped out Iran's air force and air defense network, leaving the country with a drastically weakened ability to defend its skies. And yet, the reality on the battlefield now points to a new turning point. Iran appears to have shifted toward a far more explicit and aggressive strategy of retaliation. Tehran has declared that it will respond in kind, or with even greater force, if further strikes hit its non-military infrastructure. And that means this war is not merely unresolved. It may, in fact, be entering its most dangerous phase yet.